Hi, I'm Susan. Last year, in September 2016, I started a job application process that led me to interview at 100 plus tech companies in the Bay Area. And I've seen a lot of the tech industry, and I want to share some of the most ridiculous personal stories that I've gone through. If you've asked me a year before how long the job interview process would take, I would never have even guessed that it would take like 100 job interviews for me to go through and find the best workplace for me. So my life has turned into an unexpected direction. This is not my first time as a job applicant. I've worked at previous tech companies before, including at Rotten Tomatoes and then at ThyssenKrupp, which got acquired by Cisco. My favorite former workplace is Piston in San Francisco. This particular group loves taking photo shoots, and the head of marketing once said that a company's visual identity really tells a lot about its style. And I really learned so much about cloud computing and about what it's like to work with software. And I work with some of the most creative, talented people ever gathered in a startup environment. So this is a photo of the early founding team from the early 2010s. So now I know what an exemplary workplace looks like and should feel like. And so I knew also what sort of qualities I wanted to avoid in my next gig. I definitely wanted to avoid any large companies, as I already worked in a large company, Cisco. I also wanted to avoid any workplaces with a homogeneous culture. So one of the first questions I always ask recruiters is, what is the demographics of their tech team? I also want to avoid the stereotypical tech bro culture in Silicon Valley, which to me means I don't want to work with arrogant young tech bros. I also did not want to work on silly, stupid apps. I wanted to work on apps that are substantial and have real business value. I also did not want to become a co-founder or the first engineer at a new startup. Location also mattered. I did not want to work at locations more than 53 kilometers away. So ultimately, I did find a great workplace, and the process of getting there was terrible. And here are 6 things that I hate about the job interview process. I once interviewed at a really early stage startup, 3 people. They were making an app for parents who want to find activities to do with their children. And so the engineer, the one and only engineer at the startup, and I did a code pairing exercise over the phone. I thought I did pretty well, but then a week passed, and then I heard nothing back from them. And so I was really confused, what's going on? And this is a really common, almost 90% of the companies I apply to or have spoken with, they don't even give feedback. And if they do, it's in some form of impersonal reply, oh, sorry, we couldn't move you forward to the next stage due to a number of applicants or some other reason. So at this point, I get pretty confused, and I kind of wonder, why am I getting this silent treatment? I talked to another 3-person early-stage startup. And early stage means anywhere from several weeks old to several years old. Right. Sorry for that interruption. So one time, I also interviewed with a 3-person startup. They were working on an AI product. And the engineer and I did a code pairing session together. We figured out the solution to the problem, how do you split up an apartment by a number of roommates based on how large the apartment is. And so I did pretty well. I was looking forward to hearing next steps to see what happens. And then a week later, I get the response from the engineer saying, well, ultimately, I ended up hiring my friend. And so that was my answer. He flat out told me that he hired his friend. I really appreciated his honesty. But ultimately, I thought it was a waste of my time that I went through the process, and he didn't seem to know what qualities in a job candidate that he was looking for. I did an interview with a newish early stage startup called Jelly. I went through the first on-site interview. I went to the second on-site interview, and this time it was an interview in person with the CEO and co-founder of BizStone, who you may know as one of the Twitter co-founders. So he and I sat at the same room, we're at the same room, like same table, and throughout the entire interview, he just asked me one question: Susan, what do you hope to accomplish in your lifetime? And I thought that was the most random, like, spontaneous question that anyone has ever asked me in an interview. This is my reaction. I didn't think it was a very useful question, to be honest. I just told him, made up some answer on the spot, that I wanted to work on a tech side of the product, find the right product market fit. I gave a very BS answer to a BS question. And I think that he didn't really learn much about me from that question, and I didn't really learn much about the work environment from that either. And then there was the most awkward on-site interview that happened. It was also the shortest interview. It went for about like 15 minutes. So I went to the office without really knowing what to expect. And then the interviewer asked me to make a Ruby full-stack application on the spot in 15 minutes. And I told him, well, I'm very beginner on Ruby and Rails. Are you sure you want me to like code in Ruby for 15 minutes? And he was like, yeah, sure, yeah. So this seems pretty surreal, and I just like went along with it since he's in charge of the process. And so I was sitting there, and he was like looking over my shoulder. I was like typing out like some Ruby code and trying to remember what I learned about from like the beginner Ruby tutorial. And after seeing me struggle for trying to like make a new URL route and trying to understand what's going on with this web application, he told me, OK, Susan, you don't seem to know Ruby very well, so let's just hold off on this. And once you've learned some more Ruby, then we can revisit. And so so basically, I asked him this question. Well, were you looking for people who can pick up a language pretty quickly in 15 minutes, or are you looking for someone who already knows Ruby for this position? And he could not give me a coherent answer. And so this is my reaction throughout this entire process. He did not, this interviewer did not know what he was looking for, and I ultimately did not really gain anything from that process. Initially, I expected maybe I was going for like a pairing type of scenario, but it wasn't really what I expected. So I interviewed with a 40-person biotech startup in California. They have a strong mission to automate biology labs in universities everywhere using this new biology technique called CRISPR. And I did a take-home code challenge, and then I went to the onsite where I did a presentation about a past programming project, and I made a Django application with live coding. And then finally, I got this job offer. So I was pretty excited, and I was talking to the CEO and the co-founder, and it turned out that this offer was like a pretty low offer. And so I tried to tell him that this was like not a good deal for me, and it was below the average for engineers in Silicon Valley. And he refused to offer a higher number, so I just like immediately turned it down. And so this is my reaction throughout this process. And a lot of people who are new to software engineering may take the first number that's offered to them, and that may or may not always be the best idea. And don't get taken advantage of if the employers think they can get away with hiring developers at a below market rate. I want to save the worst for last. So I was given a lot of take-home code challenges. For those who don't know, take-home code challenges can be 60-minute to 90-minute timed exams of several coding exercises to do. Or they can sometimes be an open-ended assignment, such as build a a web application using the Twitter API with some front-end component and back-end component. And so this was actually a real code assignment given to me. I want to take a moment to really deep dive about why code challenges are the worst experience. So oftentimes, the open-ended code challenges have no time constraint. So that previous example about build a Twitter API app has no time constraint. It could have taken anywhere from 1 hour to a whole weekend. There's no instructions on that assignment when I first got it. I also didn't really know what the features were, and I didn't know what exactly I was supposed to build. And ultimately, this could take anywhere. So there's no feedback, and it's hard for me to optimize how to do well on this sort of code exam when I don't really know what the interviewer is evaluating for. So say in a given week, if I apply for 3 to 4 job positions and I get 18 to 32 hours, and all of them require some sort of code challenge, that's anywhere from 18 to 32 hours total, if each code challenge was 6 to 8 hours each. Sometimes the code test may not fit the job description. I once got a code challenge that was about making a web application in Java, even though I told the recruiter that I was not hoping to work in Java. A lot of the code challenges can be pretty algorithms heavy, and there are pros and cons to algorithms heavy type of tests. And to me, I think that a lot of the was mismatch between the coding exam and what the actual job description was. For example, I was asked to, in one timed coding test, I was asked to create some tree traversal algorithm from scratch, even though the position was for a general full stack developer. Sometimes when I first submit a job application, I would get a automated code exam in the email reply. And so the recruiters expect me to invest time to solve a code puzzle, even though I haven't talked to a real human about the product or about the workplace culture. This is my typical interviewing week. So this is a week I covered about 18 interviews, 3 of which were on-site interviews, and the others were phone interviews with recruiters and engineers. After questioning, much of the companies that I talked to fell into the no criteria, so it was easy to find out which of the companies I do want to talk to. And San Francisco is a pretty expensive city, so I wanted to keep my schedule pretty busy and just keep moving from one meeting to the next one. Job searching itself can be pretty demanding and intense, and this is a typical job interview schedule. And job searching itself can be a full-time job. So I did a number of code challenges. Oh, just to take a step back. So with this type of schedule, I really don't see any time slot where I can do a 6 to 8 hour code challenge. It's just not there. And when I do work on a code challenge, I lose that same amount of time where I could be spending on researching more companies or recharging for the next set of interviews. I did a number of take-home code challenges, timed exams, and open-ended assignments. And after not getting substantial feedback from the recruiters, I kind of wanted to change my outlook on the interview process. So my solution to recruiters was that I'm just going to refuse to do code challenges, and I'm going to tell them take-home exams go against my philosophy, and yeah, just not going to do them. I've added code challenges to my no criteria. So the whole application process is pretty tiresome. Uploading the same resume to the same job application site that looks exactly the same as everyone else's is pretty tiresome. Answering the same questions from different recruiters, engineers is also pretty tiresome. So I've answered all the questions, such as what am I looking for the next role? What is the ideal workplace environment like? So pretty much I've learned to memorize much of the answers as I kept having to answer a lot of the same ones. So my first job took about 2 months to find. The second job took about 6 weeks to find. And then this recent job search I did took about 4 months to find. So wherever you are in your experience level, it's going to be an awful and terrible process. It's awful because interviewers may not know what they're looking for, and they ask irrelevant questions, or you get questions that are pretty spontaneous. And my goal ultimately was to talk to a lot of different companies, filter out the companies that don't meet the criteria, and find the rare, shining, positive exceptions, or the workplaces where I do want to work at eventually. It's easy to blame yourself that you don't know enough, or that you don't know about how to answer their arbitrary questions. And I think it's really part of this whole system that's at fault. So this is the analogy where in this factory where applicants really have very little control over or a say in. So when I get to thinking that, okay, maybe I don't know enough Java or Python or to be able to complete this challenge, I just take a step back and rethink. I've complained a lot about many things over the past several minutes, and I think that every employer is going to do the interviewing process differently, and how one employer does it is going to be completely different from how another employer does it. And there's no perfect template on what you should or should not do. So this is my every morning. I woke up with a new clean slate where I have potential to talk to new employers, new recruiters, and talk about the new products and work culture. And this was the thing that was important to me, building new products, and pretty much that was the idea that kept me going. And as we all know, software is changing pretty much every industry on the planet, and it's a privilege to be able to build cool products that people love and use. And so even throughout this whole pretty bleak process, this was the one shining moment where this is a new door and a new opportunity for me to find a way to build cool products. All right. That's all I have for rants. I do have a lot more stories, so I'm happy to talk more in person, and I'm also happy to listen to your stories, good or bad, about how your interview process was like.
Again, I am, instead of Jacopo, I'm asking if anybody have a question for Susan.
Hello. Thanks for your talk and sharing your ideas and your experiences with us. One question I'm having is, as this is literally a tiresome process, and I just had that kind of process myself a few months ago. I was wondering, do you have any regards on how to stand through it and how to keep yourself motivated and up for it, after getting no after no from a company or not any responses, and even to keep up sticking to the no's you have?
I think it's good to take breaks every so often, because you don't want to just focus on the whole job searching process 24/7. I feel like taking breaks is pretty good. And you can also vary up the schedule. So maybe instead of having the entire afternoon blocked off, have intervals where you get to take breaks in between. if you're doing a pretty, especially if you're doing a pretty intense like interview schedule, like I think it's good to like know what your limits are. Your mileage may vary, and overall, like I personally found it useful to like read when I'm not like talking to the recruiter engineer. I find it useful to read a lot about companies that are out there, and just like exploring what the space is like, everywhere from like AI to like healthcare, and like what new technologies are out there, and find the companies that are working in those new technologies. So that for me seems to be an enjoyable process, the researching part.
Thanks.
Hi. As someone who has used recruiters in the past and never once in my life had anything productive come of it, I'm curious, you've mentioned recruiters a lot. Have you had any success with them? Or have they just been in the way giving you Java jobs when you didn't want them, and you're finding the jobs you want on your own?
I pretty much did the latter. I did not use very many third-party recruiters, and a lot of the recruiters who I talked to were in-house recruiters at the tech companies already, so I didn't really talk to a lot of like third-party recruiters. But there is one, for a lot of the third-party recruiters, they're taking like some percentage of your like base salary, so like, they're not really in it for your own interests. But there was this one experience where I talked to a third-party recruiter, and they're working at this location where they're pretty good about providing like a quiet space for me to like take interviews. So that was like one of the nicer experiences. So maybe if that's available in your region, you can ask them about it, if there's quiet spaces for developers to use.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Now with that experience of 100 job interviews, what if tomorrow you were put in charge of organizing interviews? What would be your ideal interview process that you would set up for somebody else?
I've never been on the other side of the table before, so that's a really difficult question for me to decide. And I think if I were the hiring manager, I would probably offer a number of options. Not everybody can have the time to take a 6 to 8 hour code challenge. So maybe like I can offer them several options, and they can choose whichever options are most convenient for them, anywhere from like pairing or to some like exercise, or like paying them for like some X number of hours of work on a code base. All of those options, I would consider all of them.
Okay, thank you.
I'll be around for the duration of the conference, so feel free to say hi, and also feel free to argue with me if you don't agree with the points as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan.